Toby's happy. You're all here. You keep showing up. That's nice. You're on the right channel at the right time. If you're here to do a Wednesday program with CSP, Community Scholar Program, titled Jewish Artists in Post-War Art. We have with us today noted artist and educator, Tobi Kahn, live from Manhattan. Are you in Manhattan, Toby?
I'm in Manhattan.
That's awesome.
On the Upper West Side.
Nice. If you're in Manhattan, drop by and wave. Don't go into Toby's house yet. This program is sponsored by the Community Scholar Program of Orange County. This is our 20th year. You will hear a little bit more about that shortly. It's co-sponsored by Temple Beth Shalom of Needham, Massachusetts. So a shout out to all of my fellow Bostonians who are on the line from Needham, to my good friend Peter Mesnick at Temple Beth Shalom, who helped to coordinate the co-sponsorship. We're dedicating this program, Toby, in memory of one of our patrons who passed away a few years ago, Lowell Zalesnik. He was an artist in his own right as well, and I thought it'd be appropriate to remember Lowell today. Upcoming programs for CSP. Tomorrow, May 21st, Avi Strasberg is back, part 5, Love, Sex, and Relationships in Jewish Tradition. And it's Toby's favorite subject, subtopic, good sex and bad sex. I won't tell you which side Toby is on there. And we won't go further with that one. May 24th, Mark Michael Epstein, or Epstein, however he wants to be known, will be live from Poughkeepsie, Inside the Jewish Mind, Part 1, Jewish Monsters. So I hope you'll join us for the beginning of that series on Sunday. Judy Klitzner from Pardes University, live from Jerusalem, Brothers Crying Out from the Ground, the Biblical Origin of Our Divided Society. That's May 26th. May 27th, Rabbi Dr. Raphael Zaram from the United Kingdom, from London, virtual Bible tour of the British Museum. We want to get you ready for Shavuot, so he's going to take us on a private tour of the biblical artifacts in the British Museum and tell you how they relate to what you'll be studying all night when you're up late studying on Tikkun Leil Shavuot. This is our CSP's 20th year. We have officially launched our fundraising drive. I'm sure you've heard all about it right now, but if you haven't, please do support CSP. All the programs we've done since we went online March 18th, and that's over 30 programs now, have been funded by you, the supporters of CSP. There are many ways, many levels of support, and many benefits of different levels. You can go to occsp.org and check on the donation button and find out how to support us. Programs coming up this year include Robert Alter on July 26th about how challenges he faced in translating the whole Bible. Ariel Berger will be our 1-month scholar in January. The theme will be the Jewish love affair with stories. Erica Brown will be our CSP adult retreat speaker on February 14th. Tobi Kahn, who is on right now as our featured speaker, was supposed to be here for the whole month of May. He was going to be our inaugural 1-month artist in residence. COVID had other ideas, so we have Tobi now as a little appetizer, but our anticipation is that Tobi will be with us this coming May for the month, hopefully in person. Until Tobi does arrive, we anticipate that all of our programs will be online. So maybe you'll be our first live presenter in Orange County, California. If you have questions as we go along in this presentation, this is not a 1-hour class. It's about a little bit more, 1.5 hours, because Tobi's an artist and has a lot to say about art. We are recording, and with Tobi's permission, I'll make it available privately to people who are in the program, who are donors of CSP. Tobi and I can discuss it after the program. And there is no handout that I know of, but a lot of art you're going to see shortly. Who is Tobi Kahn? Tobi is a painter and sculptor whose work has been shown in over 50 solo museum exhibitions and over 70 group museum and gallery exhibitions since he was selected as one of 9 artists to be included in the 1985 Guggenheim Museum exhibition New Horizons in American Art. Works by Kahn, by Tobi, are in major museums, hospitals, sacred interfaith spaces, corporate and private collections, and his bio is so long that if I kept reading it, Tobi, I think we'd be done with the hour and a half. So I sent it out to everybody. I urge you to read who Tobi Kahn is. You can see right behind Tobi's head is at least one of his pieces, the Omer counter, so appropriate for this time of year, right, Tobi?
And it's the right day. Yeah, you can count if you forgot. It says what day it is.
Okay. So sit back, enjoy. We're going to go on a tour of Jewish artists in post-war art. Tobi, the screen is yours. You just tell me when you'd like me to advance the slides.
Okay, so this is what I want to say. First of all, I really was looking forward to coming. I was looking forward to being in California now. I'm sorry it didn't work out. So I'm giving a disclaimer before this that if you don't like this session, it's because it was online. But I hope then you would come to the one that's live in May next year. And if you did like it, it'll be even better in person. I've been working now doing these sessions via Zoom for the last 7 weeks because the School of Visual Arts where I teach has been all that way. So I think I'm better at it now than I was 7 weeks ago. So this is I wanted to start with this because I'm fascinated by the fact that every time in life there's something good that happens. And after World War II, which was a disaster, New York became a center to the art world, and Jews started becoming a big part of the art world in New York. And I do not think New York is the center of the art world anymore, but at that time it was. So I've been giving lectures throughout Eastern Europe and in London just now. And I want to say that this is about what happens in New York right after World War II. And I go on to even contemporary to a few artists. I could not show all the Jewish artists that I think are amazing. And I did not only show Jewish artists because I think the Jewish artists were part of a community in New York that was amazing. And I don't believe any individual is only one hashtag. In other words, you can be a male artist, you can be a female artist, you can be an LA artist, you can be a Boston artist, you can be a New York artist. But all of these artists that I'm showing you today were either Jewish, married to Jews, or only hung out with Jews, or were very deeply influenced by Jews. So you're going to say to me, Thomas Hart Benton wasn't a Jew. I'm aware. Jackson Pollock wasn't a Jew. I'm aware. But Jackson Pollock was married to Lee Krasner. And you'll understand how, you know, there's a saying in Hebrew, I believe it, ishto kagufo or ishta gufo, and that a husband and a wife or partners are like one person. And I deeply believe that in the art world as well. So we're going to start with the first image, which, and by the way, please, this can only be shown privately, not, you can't put it online, because I got permission to use these images, which are very famous images, for lecturing. And I'm using them for lecturing, so I wouldn't want, so Ari, I said to you, anyone in the group can see it, but I don't want it going on, you know, Facebook Live or something like that. So I'm putting on my glasses and so I need to see. These are the irascibles. And the irascibles were, you'll see there's only one woman in the photograph. Her name was Stern. She was Jewish. But in there you have Stamos. Ernst was Jewish. Newman was Jewish. Rothko was Jewish. Gottlieb was Jewish. And so half this group of the irascibles, these were the first group of artists that were part of the abstract expressionists. One of the things that I find fascinating is everyone's wearing a tie and jacket. Over half the people are holding cigarettes. And you'll see in the pictures, Barnett Newman's in the front, Rothko's in the front. They're both holding cigarettes. And when you see the portraits of them, you'll see them having cigarettes all the time. The only woman in there is wearing a coat and has a bag. And I also love that she's at the highest point. Very fascinating piece. This would be like the cover of Vanity Fair, but it wasn't. All right, so that's how we start. So we're going to start off with, and I'm going to try, I'm watching my time. I have a little clock here. So I'm going to try and go as quick as possible. And please hold your questions. And I look forward to answering everything I can. So let's go to the next image. I hope, yeah. So this is Mark Rothko. The reason I want to start with him is because I believe, and by the way, I'm talking only as an artist who is, I'm talking as an artist / educator. I think Mark Rothko is one of the most important, if not in the top 10 of Jewish artists in the world through history. I think Soutine is another one. I think Pizarro is another one. There are many, many, many of them, and there are many contemporary living artists, but Mark, I believe, took his Jewishness in a very deep, deep level, and his knowledge of Yiddish and Hebrew were fluent. And he came from Latvia, and he comes to New York and becomes a very important figure. You see, by the way, he has a cigarette, and he's one of the only ones who doesn't wear a jacket. He does have a tie on. And let's go to the next image. The next image is one of his early pieces from 1948. And what I want to explain is that artists do not start by having a specific language immediately. They change, just the way all of us, we get used to who we are. And in the beginning, we are looking a lot at what other people are doing at the same time. And then we only find our voice a bit later. Yes, there are one or two people like Keith Haring and Jean-Michel Basquiat. And there are some artists who find their voice when they're like 26, but that is not the norm. So he had started as a figurative painter. I'm not showing you that work, but this is the beginning when you can see there's a difference between Western art and Eastern art. In Western art, you have something called a foreground, middle ground, and background. And here he's playing with that sense of space, and it almost looks like you could be looking into somebody's room. So you see that yellow is right in the front, then comes the orange, then that blue goes all the way further back. And depending on your screen, it looks very differently. But what's powerful to me that he's already starting to play with edges. Let's go to the next one. So in the next one is one of my favorite paintings of his. There are many books that are on the cover of this. And here, I think he shows his chops at an artist who understands how to do something called transparencies. Transparencies mean that the color is not totally opaque. It has a translucency to it, and you can see the color that's right underneath it. So on the bottom section, it's more of an orange. On the top, it's more of a yellow. And if you know who Joseph Albers is, very important color theorist who taught at Yale, and who was Eva Hess's teacher too, and many, many artists, teachers. We're going to see another very important teacher later. He plays with that beautiful sense of space. And I consider this a very, very Jewish painting. Why? Because there's a saying in Judaism that if there's one, you have two rabbis and you have three opinions. And I like the fact that each image, there's a movement there. Even on screen, you can see that the top does not look totally flat. Not that I'm against Ellsworth Kelly, whose work I love, but Ellsworth Kelly, very simple color. You see the one color and that's all you get. Here, the more you look at it, you start saying to yourself, is that really more red in that orange or is in that yellow? There's three different yellows. And look at the way the edges are. And on the left-hand side, on the bottom of the orange, you'll see there's a small section of a light purple. Now, if you ever have learned Mishnah and Gemara, you know that the Gemara page, this is one of my thinkings. I do not know if I'm correct, and he's not alive anymore, so I can't ask him. But he obviously knew Talmud. He knew Hebrew and Yiddish. His father he came from a traditional family, and he taught at a day school, so he must have seen this. I think it looks very much the way a Mishnah and Gemara are set up on a page, that you have this central section and other sections. Anyway, I hope you find his work of interest. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, but I do think he's a great artist. Let's go to the next. The next is a darker period of his. He does that quite a few years later. And by now I don't know if you know this, he unfortunately committed suicide. He was quite depressive. And you can see in there that the bottom is like a dark purple and the top is a very lush red, but it's on an almost off black background. And what I love about it, it looks like the two colors are moving. There's something it feels like you're in a film. Or I don't know if you know who the artist James Turrell is, who's a light artist. A lot of West Coast artists worked with light. I feel there's a light emanating from inside the painting. And when you're standing in front of him, if you ever go to the Tate Gallery in London, or you go to the Phillips Collection in Washington, and you're in one of his rooms, that you see these all around, it is shocking how it looks like it's not a flat, it's not a two-dimensional surface. It looks much more three-dimensional. Now we're going to go to one of his most famous pieces, which is called the Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas, the Emanu-Els. I don't know if you know who the Emanu-Els are. The Emanu-Els are one of the biggest collecting families in America. It's the Emanu-Els, the Astors, and the Blaffers. And Mrs. Emanu-El founded the Dia Foundation. She fell in love with Mark Rothko's work very early on, and she asked him to create a chapel. I have also created meditative spaces, and this is one of the spaces that has been a huge influence on me. Do I think it's somewhat sad? I do, but it's very beautiful. If you've ever gone to pay a Shiva call, I think this room is so much about Kedusha, about holiness. And when you look at the back paintings, they are really not black. You can see from the top, it is black, but inside there are variations of color. Later, we're going to see an Ad Reinhardt piece that looks like it's one color black, and it's really 9 colors black. Here, you can see differentiation between each one, and it makes you think of what triptychs are. It makes you think of what inner space is. And I think if you ever, to me, it's a sacred space. And I think Mark Rothko understood what that meant. I should tell you also that most of the artists that I'm showing you were very affected by the Shoah, by the Holocaust. And this chapel, he wanted it to be a very serious one. I don't picture a baby naming here or a wedding here, but I do think there are other things that we think about, especially during this time when people can't go to a funeral or pay a Shiva call in person. I look at this space and I feel its holiness in a very deep way. Now we're going to go to Adolf Gottlieb. So the first 2 people I wanted to start with are both Jews. Adolf Gottlieb was born in 2003 in New York, and he also, by the way, you can see there, is smoking. Again, I think that's so funny that so many artists were serious smokers. But you can see he's wearing a tie, and he's wearing a beautiful white shirt, and then he's wearing some sort of something over it. So you should understand how artists worked is fascinating to me, that we don't think that way anymore. When I go to my studio, I'm wearing a painting shirt and painting pants. Almost everyone I know does that. I don't know of anyone today who would wear a tie and jacket to be painting. Let's go to the next image. I show you these images, which I got permission for to use, but they're very well-known paintings, and I picked ones that show you more of the character of the artist. Now, Adolf Gottlieb was, and by the way, some people say to me, Adolf, was he named for Hitler? And I'm going like, no, Adolf was a typical German name. I had an uncle named Adolf. Adolf Hitler ruined the name for many people. I mean, it was a regular name. It was like Bill in Germany. So these are called pictograms. And he was very interested in the spiritual. I also think that he's another person that I'm sure saw a Gemara and understood the difference between Aramaic and Hebrew. And today, if these were Asian artists from China, you would say, oh, they're so interested in looking at symbols that tell you a story. And pictograms, he used these images to tell you a story. Now, this is early work. You remember I started with 48 with Rothko, and now I'm starting in 46. This is his early work. And if you think of each individual area on here, you'll start to notice that when he gets more simplified, go to the next one, you'll see he starts simplifying right away. We're going to the next one. This is done 2 years later, and now it's opening up the space much, much more. And you see the way color, these are called low intensity colors. They're tertiary colors. And think, if you remember how Mark Rothko is doing translucency in his painting, here you also see that there's a background color and then there's a color right on top. And that grayish area that's coming around sort of holds them all together. Now, right after that, he moves into his more adult period. We'll go to the next one. I'm watching my time. This was when he's already a very well-known artist, and he's very interested in the idea of chaos and stability. And he's very well known for doing these paintings. I love that it says cadmium red over black. Cadmium red is a very rich color, and you can see very much like Rothko, that right around the edge of the red, it almost looks like you see the canvas peeking through. And on the bottom black, you also see that it's not a defined edge. And the reason I'm showing you these two artists first is I really think there's no accident that many of their peers who were not Jewish were looking at overall paintings. When we see Jackson Pollock, he goes from edge to edge. It's about looking at something as a whole piece. And I think many of these Jews, this is only Tobi Kahn speaking. I'm an artist who lectures on art. I'm not an art historian. The other thing I think is fascinating, during this period, Clement Greenberg, the major art historians and critics were Jews also. So that makes it very easy that so many Jews get front and center. But you'll see that it's hovering in space, so there's room to see where the individual pieces end and where the art, where the images that are in what's called on top or frontal are sitting on a beautiful white background. Now we're going to go to Barnett Newman. I love this picture of him too. Again, cigarette, 3 for 3 in cigarettes. And this is a very famous image of him. I love seeing his eyeglass in there. And he became very famous later in his life for doing the Stations of the Cross at the in Washington. But I met his wife after he had died, and I asked her, did he, was he okay about his Jewish background? And she said, yes, he was definitely considered himself a Jew, but he looked at himself as a Jew who was open to the rest of the world. And I think that's very important. Let's go to the next one. So this is one of his early works. I hope you see what I'm trying to do now. If you can visualize and remember, we saw Mark Rothko. We saw all of them in 48. 48 is the beginning of their careers. And we saw that with all three artists. And then they go into their more grown-up stage 10 or 12 years later. So here again, what to me is fascinating is very different than Rothko. He's building on one color over another color. It's not totally translucent, but translucent means you can see through it for the non-artists in here. But tertiary colors are called low intensity colors. He's not doing what Barnett Newman did. I mean, he's not doing what Gottlieb did by using red, which is a primary color. White and black are called values, but he's using colors that are all mixed of other colors. So none of these, all these colors are mixed from primary colors. And he's using white as almost a condiment in there. So you'll see the browns, and then you'll see other colors, and then you'll see that yellow and the green, and you start seeing that he's having a brown color coming over the top layer right in a third way through on the right side. And that is right above all the colors, and it goes back to the original color underneath. And what I find fascinating is, again, it's like thinking about Judaism, about all these dialogues about space. Let's go to the next one. So the next one, the next two that I'm showing you of Barnett Newman are the ones that he's well known for. This is only 1 year later, but he's already now playing with, they're called zips. Barnett Newman is known for his zips. It's one color of an orange breaking a space. Now, some of you will say to me, don't you find that boring? And I'll say, no, I happen to like it. But what is he trying to say? And I think what he's trying to say is he's showing you how a color can act like it's in front of another color. It's like walking into a space. Since many of you are from California, you will know all the light artists, James Turrell and Doug Wheeler, who cut a hole in a ceiling or play with light as a color. They're doing something very similar about creating space through just one change. Either it's through light or a piece of a change of color on top of it. Let's go to the next one. Now, this is a very famous piece of his. And somebody, many people, it's flat, it's a very large piece. And if you look, it's all red background. And then he has all the way to the left, you don't see it, but very little, there's a little bit of a red line going down the side. Then 1/3 there, there's a white line. Then there's another purplish line. And then all the way to the right, there's another orange line, and then a yellow line all the way to the edge. And what fascinates me, it's called Manaroke and the Sublime. It's about this idea of how we fit into the world, and that it's not about a simple thing. Like if this was somebody like Ellsworth Kelly who was doing art at the same time, he would have just had one big red painting. Or if it would have been somebody like Joseph Albers, he would have had three reds on top of each other. You have to know if you like or dislike very minimalist abstract work, if this talks to you. But I just want to tell you one thing, and I say it from the bottom of my heart. No artist would spend this much time in their life to do this if they didn't think they were trying to tell you something interesting. You might say to me, I don't find that interesting. And you're allowed to say that, and you're allowed to feel that. Not all the artists that we're going to see are the same. These were artists, and I think it's important that all three of them were Jewish with Jewish knowledge, which I think is important. And it's about, like, it can be either this way or that way. There's not only one exact answer. Now we're going to start with the guy who's most important. I'm sure 90% of you know, who's Jackson Pollock. Now, he is not a Jewish artist, but his wife was a Jewish artist, and I think she saved his life. I'm not the only one who thinks that, and I'm very happy that she's getting the credit she deserves. But he loved dripping paint. There's some beautiful films of watching him do this. And what he did is he had a bucket. By the way, you see he's not have a cigarette in his hand, and he's wearing all black, which is what many contemporary artists do. In fact, I'm one of them. I'm sitting right here in all black because I was painting right beforehand. And he is taking a bucket of paint. He has sometimes he used a brush and sometimes he dripped it, and it's called automatic writing. He's trying to go all over the place. Now, the reason I'm showing you the next piece by his teacher, whose name is Thomas Hart Benton, is if you look at this, you'll start to understand how abstraction came into being. So his teacher was this. If you notice, there's real beautiful movement of the way the figures move into the painting. It's not a typical foreground, middle ground, background. You feel interaction in the front, then you see part of the boat right behind there, and then you see the background all the way there. But there's a beautiful sense of movement, and you'll see this one. This is an early Jackson Pollock that nobody likes to talk about. The next one, where you see his teacher's work is so obviously present there, and you see the skeletons and you see the figure, but it's already starting to have movement, and you'll see that just a few years later, 9 years later, becomes one of his signature pieces. We'll go to the next one, which is all about the next slide. That is Jackson Pollock when he's king. I mean, this is very all around. He's still an abstract painter, but I find this very different than the three first artists that I showed you, because, you know, people have said to me, what happens if you cut it off an inch before the edge? Well, I don't think it's what the artist wanted, but it's about overallness. It's about seeing the entire piece. As an interesting aside, if you go to museums, you'll usually see the end of the canvas because he used paint that was not very good paint. He used house paint. And many of the pieces had to be restored. And when I was in undergraduate school, I did restoration with some, that was one of my jobs. And what they did with this is they take the whole canvas of the Pollock, they turn it upside down on the floor, they take some sort of a glue attachment, and then they reconnect the whole thing to another piece of canvas. So you should just know that this was done with house paint. The other three artists I showed you were all using oil paint until now. Let's go to the next one. I want you to see it again very up close of how he worked now with a big brush, but always a bucket in his hand. And Hans Manuth did a beautiful video. And again, I only got permission to use this video, these images, because I did it for an educational purpose, because these are copyrighted photographs and they're breathtaking. So if you get a chance to see the small video or any more of his pictures, you really should. Now, the next one is Jackson Pollock from '52. We'll go to the next one. And I'm showing you this because you're going to see how he and his wife, Lee Krasner, were so intertwined. And I'm a big advocate that it was not a one-way street. I think she helped him. First of all, she helped him mentally. Everyone agrees. But I thought as an artist, she really was very supportive. Now we're going to the next image, and now we're going to Lee Krasner. That is really why. So Lee Krasner came from an observant Jewish family. Her father was quite observant. And I think this tells a lot. She is sitting there. I'm showing you two pictures because I want you to see her alone with her picture. But he is coming into her studio. He has his cigarette there. So you can tell he's not painting because he's wearing his jean jacket and his pants and his shoes, and he's not wearing all black. He is bringing into her space his painting on the floor, and she is giving him advice. I love this picture so much because you don't have to know them well to see that he's looking down at it and saying, so, Lee, what do you think? Should I change this? Should I do this? And she's looking up at him and saying, you know, I think if you did this or you did that, it would work better. So do you understand what I'm showing you? It's going into her space and she's giving him advice. Let's go to the next one. I didn't want you to show that as her only photograph because I think she's a great artist in her own right. And I wanted you to see her photographed in her space. Now she has a bit of issues with her family. She grew up in Brooklyn and she wants out desperately. And she wants to be not out of Judaism because she talks about her Judaism later, but it was a shtetl. Brooklyn was not like Brooklyn now, which is the hottest place in town. And you have all different neighborhoods in Brooklyn. She came from the Brooklyn that everyone were refugees, and she saw herself as an artist, not in conflict with her Judaism, but she was an artist who was a Jew and a woman and all the other things. And I think one of the things that I think are so important to this period is that people are more than one thing. I'm showing you all artists who I think brought their Judaism with them if they had Judaism, but they were artists who were other things also. And I think as I teach today, and I've taught for over 30 years at the School of Visual Arts, I have many students who don't want to be only known as a Black artist or a Chinese artist or a gay artist or a woman artist. They want to be an artist who brings together all those components. And I really want to talk about her as one of these people. Everyone else was what they were, but she adds a whole new dimension because you have to remember, she was a woman artist at a time that it wasn't very typical. And there's a very famous statement that's been written over and over again by her teacher, Hans Hofmann. And he basically writes, when he sees her work, wow, this work is so great, I didn't know a woman did that. Now, that's kind of obnoxious, but it's a sign of the time that it was. But by the way, Hans Hofmann taught 3 of the artists we're seeing today. They happen all to be women. But he was considered one of the best teachers. I just see him at a time that people didn't understand what that meant to say that. But so she really was dealing with all those issues. Let's go to the next one. So this is done later in her life. She was very interested. Look at the movement. She's very interested in plants and in flowers and in skulls. She's an abstract painter, but she is nothing like Jackson Pollock, but she has similar languages. And what do I mean by that? She's interested in overall painting, but if you look at it, I think she has more of a sense of individual things happening in the painting. First of all, she knows a lot about color theory, which she must have as she studied with Hans Hofmann. She's using red and green. Those are complementary colors. She's also using white and off-white as a color, which, I mean, the off-white, which is a yellowy color, is a color, but the white is technically not, but she uses that as a background. And the more you look at it, the more you see different things happening in here at the same time. So yes, is she an overall painter? She is, but no, she's not doing the drip system as Jackson Pollock did. Let's go to the next one, which is one of my favorites. She did this in 1965, and it's called Night Creatures. And you look at it, and you see these very strange figures coming in there. Now, we're going to see Philip Guston later, and he is another artist who feels that abstraction doesn't do enough for them and decides he has to go into figuration. And I find this fascinating of hers also because she came from that world of pure abstraction. And now as she gets older, and the next one is from 72, she feels she needs more. Oh, go back one. It's my fault. I shouldn't have said that in the next one, but we can see. But look at what she does with that little bit of brown all the way to the edges. That's what makes it a great painting to me. She ends the painting where she wants it to be. So there, I don't know if you noticed that, but towards the middle, that reddish brown is all the way around all the sides. And then she puts little bits of it inside. So it almost looks like a woodcut or a Japanese print. Now we get to the next one, which is one of her most famous late paintings from 1972, that you start seeing these floral things coming in, and she's now playing, and people have said that she must have been more interested in Matisse by that time and cutouts. I love watching how artists grow and change. I've said this, I've worked with many students for over 20 years because I've been teaching for so long, and I see that with myself also. What I think happens with wonderful artists is they continue to grow. They might stay in their own language, but they really continue to grow. And I think this is beautiful poem. This to me is about lushness, about aliveness. And I have to say, she has unfortunately quite a few other artists. When her husband was dead, she had much more time to grow as her own person. Now we Klein, who I consider a Jewish artist. Some people say he wasn't, he's half Jewish. But his best friend was Aaron Siskind, who is a photographer, and I'm going to show you him later also. But I'm counting him. The only ones who are not Jews, I will tell you right away, which we had. And then there's a machlokas, which I love about Jews. Some people say they are Jewish, they're not Jewish. I think he's Jewish. And what I love about him is he starts using black and white, and it's obviously that he's looking at photography. When I show you Aaron Siskind's work, you'll go like, oh my God, he totally ripped him off. But what I like about him is that he is very interested in not using color. That's an interesting decision to do at that time in the world. He's doing massive black and white pieces. And if you look at them, and I'm going to show you later, this Aaron Siskind, you'll see that they look very much like they're taking from buildings being built. Again, he's not wearing a tie and jacket. Let's go on to the next one. His father was a miner. His father killed himself. He had a very, very tough life. But you'll see in this one that he's using the canvas, that off-white color in the background is canvas, and then he uses white as a color, and then he puts this black calligraphy type thing as the frontal piece. Very different than Jackson Pollock, but he is basically drawing on the surface. And again, I feel he's like a scribe. You know, I look at this and I go like, wow, he's really telling me something without words, but there's a narrative in there. And when you see this Aaron Siskind at Martha's Vineyard, and by the way, I'm not telling you a secret, everyone knows. Let's go to the next one. This was his good friend, and this is a photograph. And he definitely, this is not a question. Certain things I say, you can say, well, that's my opinion. This isn't my opinion. He definitely was looking at these photographs and then took many of his own photographs, but his friend, who is very Jewish and pretty Jewishly committed, Aaron Siskind, he saw these works and went like, wow, I should be doing this too. Look at the next one, and you'll see it even more obviously. The next piece. Again, you see it, it looks like building, you know, when you have buildings, these big cranes moving big things. I hope you like his work. I love his work. I mean, I feel he was a big influence on me as a young artist. I like the fact that it felt like he was telling a story in writing. And I studied in yeshiva for many years. And, you know, one of the things I loved about studying is, and I teach something called the Artists Beit Midrash, where I've been a co-facilitator of that for 20 years. that everything is about going back and forth. It's about, well, this rabbi says this, and then this rabbi says that, and then this one doesn't agree with either one of them. I think his work is very much about that. And he, like John Marin, uses white as a color, which was considered very not typical. And he paints over the black, and he puts black. You can see in the bottom, it's like erased. He puts color down, then he adds again, then he retracts again. So it's not the color of the canvas, but it's about going back and forth. Next, we go to Philip Guston, who's a real hero of mine. And I have to say, if I took you around my house, I have a beautiful Philip Guston in my home. The reason I loved him so much is I love a guy named Philip Guston. He changed his name not to sound so Jewish. And Philip Guston still sounds pretty Jewish, but his name was Goldstein. There are quite a few of the artists who changed their names. Rothko did too. And he's holding a cigarette in his hand, which I think is hysterical. And this is an image of a cigarette behind him. He did not start like this. The reason I showed you this picture, this is his mature work. His early work from 54, let's go to the next one, is what he became famous for. And I give him so much credit because he was part of the abstract expressionists. When you look at the colors, you'll notice that for the rest of his life, he continues using the same low intensity colors, and he loves red. By the way, if you ever look at Soutine's work, his father was a shochet, and I've always found it fascinating that he used red. Shochet is a ritual slaughterer, and I think that's one of the reasons he used red. This is not Soutine. I'm just throwing that in as a side. But he is doing this abstraction, and you can see very much like Rothko's and Barnett Newman's of the same time. It's very much about using the red as the front color, then comes that grayish color, then comes the white color. When his father dies, he's very upset, and the Jewish Museum showed his Kaddish series, which were big black shapes, very much like Gottlieb's, on a white background, and it was like the void. When he felt that his dad had died, it was, he went through this period, and he wanted to do some paintings that related to that period. He's also very famous for doing the Nixon images. He was very anti-Nixon, and he did some great cartoons. Let's go to the next one. So by the 70s, he feels abstraction doesn't work for him. He lives in a place where there's Ku Klux Klan. I did not want to show those famous Ku Klux Klan pieces of his, but he feels he can't tell a story without images in there. And you have to understand what it feels like for an artist who has a huge following, who's known as an abstract painter, to leave abstraction and go to cartoon type stuff. No one was doing it at that time. I was lucky enough to be in art school in 1978, and I had a teacher named George McNeil. And at that time, I wore a yarmulke in class. And George said to me, you're Jewish. You should really know Philip Guston's work. And I said, what does one thing have to do with the other? He goes, no. He was very committed to his Jewishness. And he told me about the pieces that he did about his father for Kaddish. And he said, he's a Jewish storyteller. And that has never left my mind. Every image in here, like if you remember Gottlieb's pictograms, the shoes are telling you something, the iron is telling you something, the book is telling you something, the cigarette is telling you something, the light is telling you something, the pulley for the light is telling you something, the two nails in there are something. Now you have to understand that even though this is many years later, and this is not only me, Tobi Kahn, speaking, many people have said, he experiences the Ku Klux Klan, he starts thinking about the Shoah, the Holocaust, and he starts thinking about the fact that people start seeing these rooms of, I couldn't bring myself to show it to you, of eyeglasses, these images of all the shoes, these images of, all these terrible things that the Nazis put into one place. And you see that he's starting to grapple with his background. Go to the next one, which is a very powerful piece of his. This one, every time I see it, I feel like crying. It's called Rug 3, but it's much more about disembodied legs and shoes with nothing. It's a very powerful, lonely piece to me. And I think many of the, I'm sure you all know anyway, many of the cartoonists that did Superman and all these things were Jews who came to America and wanted to work in comic books because they didn't want to have to deal with showing their face, but they wanted to tell stories. There's a very famous piece of Superman. If you want to Google it later. Look at the cover of Superman fighting the Nazis. And he on purpose picks Superman to have black hair rather than blonde Aryan hair, and he's fighting the Nazis. So I just think not every artist wants to be so explicit, but to me, this is such a powerful piece. Next, we go to Ad Reinhardt, who was quoted by his wife that he wasn't a Jew, but Hitler would have killed him if he were in Germany because he was called a degenerate artist. And he teaches dozens of Jewish artists, not one or two, dozens. I decided to show him rather than Joseph Albers, who taught at Yale, because he taught three of the people I'm showing you today. He taught Lee Krasner, and I think her color sensibilities comes from that. He taught Louise Nevelson, and he taught Frankenthaler. Look at this next piece, which I so love. This is a gun done in 38, and this is what I was trying to show you again. This is only Tobi Kahn speaking. He has very clean edges. The two Jews who did this stuff had very, I love edges that are a little more loose. Everything's defined, and every color you can see doesn't look like there's a foreground and background. It's one layer, and he uses gray, which is a value, as the background. So it looks like an interplay. Go to the next one, which I love. And this is red and gray. It's really not red and gray. It's red and like a bluish color or a greenish bluish color. And here you start seeing that amazing movement back and forth. Now he does that in 54. By then he's a very well-known teacher. And I believe this because I can tell this about myself, that I've been teaching for years and I've learned so much from my students. And here you can see he's learned so much from his students. Let's go to the next one, which is my favorite of his. And I'm giving this to all of you as a present because this is the painting. And when we go to the museum, please God, in May next year, when we go to the Broad Museum, I'm going to ask all of you to walk with me and show me the piece of art that you're going to say, okay, Tobi, now you've gone too far. What is this all about? So I'm going to explain to you what this is all about. 90% of you, I wish I could see all your faces, are going to say, what is that black square doing and who cares? It isn't a black square. It's 9 black squares. It's like a tic-tac-toe board. And even though it's online, I had my assistant play with it so you could see it as best as you can. His interest was, how close can you get to black to still show it that there are 9 different blacks? Now, you'd say to me, I don't really care. I just don't care. Well, I'm sorry you don't care. I'm sure I don't care about certain things that you care about. This is an artist work. This is about teaching the viewer to spend 5 minutes. I don't know if you know this, by the way. Most people go to museums and spend like 3 seconds. Forget about minutes looking at something. He wants to force you to stand there and wait a minute and look at this and say, oh my God, those are 9 different blacks. How did he do that? How close do you have to get to do that? That, to me, I don't want to own this, by the way. If you look around my house, I wouldn't do this, but I do want you to understand this. Now we're going to go to Helen Frankenthaler. She's a very interesting case and study because she's one of the most important artists today. She was born in Manhattan. Her father was a very famous judge. She lived on the Upper East Side. I have to say an aside, because I adored my mother. She and my mother went swimming every morning together at the 92nd Street Y. And for my undergraduate paper, I wrote on Helen Frankenthaler, and she didn't want to give me the interview, but she said, oh, Ellen is so nice, I'll do it for you. And I studied with her teacher, E.C. Goosen, and he couldn't believe that she gave me the interview, but she did. She wasn't the easiest person, but she was born the same year as my mother, and they were good not good buddies, but they were good acquaintances. But look at the way she's dressed. She is wearing, which I love, she's wearing a nice sweater, and then she's wearing something to wear over that. So remember, she lives on the Upper East Side. She has a relationship for many years with Clement Greenberg for 5 minutes, not 5 minutes, for quite a few years. She marries Motherwell. They both came from wealthy families. She did not come from a family like Lee Krasner, who felt that she had to leave her family. She didn't come from a family like Mark Rothko. She came from an Upper East Side Jewish family, very cultured. Her father and mother expected her to do great things. They weren't uptight about being an artist, but if she was going to become an artist, she better become a great artist. So she was one of 3 sisters. All of them became very accomplished. This is her piece from 57. I love this piece. She is really looking at how, again, look at these beautiful surfaces. She's using oil paint and lets the oil paint go into the canvas, and it sort of moves around. There's a beautiful sense of movement. I find her, she's doing this a few years later than Newman and the rest of them. I mean, if you look at Rothko's, Newman's, Gottlieb, hers is more loose, and there's more of a playful sense of it. She also loves nature, a little bit like Lee Krasner, but she is letting the painting get saturated in the surface. She becomes a major teacher for many younger artists named Kenneth Noland, and Morris Lewis. She is considered a Gadol Hador, like a major player. Let's go to the next one. By 73, she's in her, like, she's amazing, and she starts using acrylic paint. She's one of the only ones that does that, and because she wants to stain the surface, and if you stain the surface with oil paint, it'll eventually eat away at the canvas. But this way, if you use acrylic, you don't have to worry. It looks a little like watercolor, and I have heard her say that she has no problem with that. And again, remember, she's using both tertiary colors, colors that are not very pure, but she's also using very rich oranges, pinks, and greens. Let's go to the next one. Oh, and she leaves white lines in there very beautifully. I'm going very quickly because I want to show you so much work, and I'm scared about my time. This is a later piece of hers. I just think it's a poem. Again, very much like Rothko, the colors keep moving in and out of the surface. It alludes to landscape. She obviously is looking at Japanese screens, and the work is really changing. And it's, I don't even know what to say. I love it so much. I like the way that green on the very bottom in the middle moves all the way back, as does the brown in the back. I would love to see a two-person show of Rothko and her, because I think the two of them during certain years are very, very interesting, the way the color moves back and forth. Now we're going to go to Louise Nevelson. Again, she's holding a cigarette. I just find this so funny that everyone smoked. No one got the memo that it causes cancer. And they're all smokers, major, major smokers. She takes herself very, very seriously as an artist. She only starts selling her work after she's in her 60s. I don't know if you know what that means. All the other artists I've shown you so far, their careers start much younger. She starts showing as she starts wanting to make art as a young kid. Gets married young. She decides she doesn't want to be a wife and mother. She leaves her husband. She's not the only one who did this. Alice Neal did it. There are many, many artists. At that time, it was much harder to be a woman artist. And I am so happy I'm alive today and I didn't live during that time, because to be born as and today also, by the way, being an artist of color, I don't know if you know this, being an artist of color right now, being a person of color in the world is terrible. Being a visual artist right now, it's the greatest time. I think it's very similar to how it was for Jews after World War II. And that's why I think there was so many great Jewish artists after World War II. They might have hated Jews, but for whatever reason, maybe because of Clement Greenberg, maybe because of Meyer Shapiro, maybe because people didn't want to speak so badly of Jews because it was right after World War II, especially in the art world. That was the time that it was great to be, I think, very accepted by the larger Jewish community, by the larger artistic community. but now it's definitely people of color. So she starts off her life, has a very rocky start, starts to have some great shows. She used her oil paint instead of, she sold, I mean, somebody just wrote that, she sold some of her food stamps to get paint, as did, I don't want to only pick on her, there's a very famous film on Alice Neal, and you see her kids saying that, yeah, she sold our food stamps to get paint. And she definitely cared a lot about her work. So the next piece is, let's go to the next. This is, oh my God, just so beautiful. Her father is a construction guy, and she originally gets the metal and steel from her father, and then starts taking found wooden objects. And she was brilliant enough to realize that if she wants to use found objects, it's better to spray them or paint them one color so you can see them in total. I think it's very important to say, again, I'm only speaking as Tobi Kahn, not as anybody else. I think it's very obvious that she was a painter first, because when you look at this, you can see the way she's building up the space. But it's a beautiful space. I'm very proud to say I'm in the Architectural Digest shows 6 sacred spaces, and I'm my sacred space is one of them. She's another. Ellsworth Kelly's another one. But I find her work so spiritual. I think they're beautiful. Let's go to the next. The next one, I always think to myself in the Kodesh Kodashim, in the Holy of Holies, you know, when they talk about the 2 angels on the top that were gold, I look at this gold and it looks so beautiful. And it looks like she's writing little messages into each individual box. We'll go to the next one because I wanted you to see how it looks in white, gold, and now in black. And by then she's so well known and she's starting to sell well that she starts buying prefab pieces and she puts them like as a part of a chair, legs of a table. She's starting to get old pieces of furniture and breaking them down and putting them together. This last piece of hers, it's called Mrs. N's Palace. This was done between 64 and 77. This was shown a few years ago at the Jewish Museum. And if you know Kusama, who I think is another great artist who does these infinity rooms, Louise Nevelson did these rooms way before. So and so did Lucas Samaras. Many people later do rooms, but I want to give her credit that she was one of the first people to build these spaces to look at as you see it from outside and inside. Now we're going to go to Mark de Souvero. One of his parents, most people say, was Jewish. It's a question. His second wife was the head of the culture department in New York, Levin. And anyway, I look at his work and I wanted to show you his work. So I count him as a Jew. But look at this next piece because I wanted to show you this in relationship to Franz Klein. Look at the way he's using in sculpture what Franz Klein is doing in painting. And again, it's very much about building. It's about thinking about, there's a very interesting show on right now at MoMA. I just gave a lecture online about the show at MoMA of Donald Judd. And Donald Judd was interviewed as a young artist. He said, so do you think you're a sculptor like most sculptors? And he said, I'm not a sculptor. And he goes, why aren't you a sculptor? And he goes, because I don't make pedestals for my work. And I'm not like Rodin. And the woman who was the curator at the museum says, maybe at the time he said that, he wouldn't have called himself a sculptor, but because of people like him and Mark de Souvero and Richard Serra, the meaning of what sculpture means has changed so drastically. And here is an example of using found wooden objects, putting them together. We're going to see Eva Hess later. You're going to see how she uses a totally different material. But look at this, beautiful work. The next piece is outdoors. And you can see, and now it's actually looking like they're building materials. Let's go to the next because I'm watching my clock and I'm getting nervous. Another one, and then another one. I wanted to see the last one, which reminds me so much of a cauldron. I just think it's very interesting the way he plays with things and hanging things. Now we're going to go to George Segal. I want to tell you a great George Segal story. And I don't know if my son who lives in LA is online, but my son was there. So my mom was totally supportive of him being an artist. my dad, it wasn't, he thought I should do something else. And George and I were good friends, and George had a big show at the Jewish Museum, and George had written a recommendation to me for a Guggenheim and written other recommendations for me. And I said to my son, do you want to go to see George Segal? And I showed him the images, and he said, yes. He was a very little boy. And I called my dad, and I said, Dad, I know you like his work. Do you want to go see his work? And my dad obviously wanted to go because it was more realistic, and he knew the Holocaust piece, which I'm going to show you of George's. And George went to my dad and said to him, I just want to tell you, Mr. Kahn, I know you like my work, but your son is a really talented artist. He has what to say, and he'll do great things for the Jewish people. Then he pulled me to the side and he said, listen, I've written your recommendations. What I just did for you is the best thing I can do for you in your life. So I want to say George was one of the menschiest human beings ever. He grew up on a chicken farm, and now comes his work. So this is an early piece. I want to show you that he didn't only do Jewish things. He did many Jewish things. He was very interested in the everyman. What does it mean to be everyman? And he, Dwayne Hansen later does sculpture with figures, but he used, when you have a cast, he used plaster, and many times the men are his assistants and the women are his daughter or his wife. He reused them over and over again. Go to the next one. This is the Holocaust piece. It's such a powerful piece. The Jewish Museum has one. There are quite a few of them. Some were done in plaster, some were done in bronze. And he wanted to not show you emaciated Jews. He wanted to show you them and say to the world, you could have been here too. This was not only Jewish people who you thought were like vermin and all that. I don't even know what to say. I'm so proud to have known him, and I love that he did this work. The next piece he did was called The Bread Line. Again, he consciously used 2 or 3 people. You'll see some of these models are the same people, and he dressed them up to be about every person. Let's go to the next one. That's all in bronze. This is his very famous Gay and Liberation piece that's downtown in New York. And again, he tried to make them not look too obviously one or another, because he wanted to talk about what it meant to be a lesbian and what it meant to be a gay man. And he wanted them to look not too young, not too old, not too good looking, not too pretty, not too ugly. He just wanted them to be people, because he really believed that every person, as he did with his Holocaust work, as he did with the Bread Line, it should be about everyone. Some people later criticized him that he should have actually used 2 gay men and 2 gay women. I don't buy that. Let's go to the next. Eva Hess. Oh my God, what a great artist. She had a very rough life. I grew up in Washington Heights. When I was 6, I told my mother I wanted to be an artist. By the time I was 9, everyone said, oh, if he wants to be an artist, he should look at the work of Eva Hess. She had died in her mid-30s. I never got to meet her, but she was one of the greatest artists. Her mother unfortunately committed suicide. Her memories were a lot about the Shoah, and her work, the reason I want you to show her after George Segal, George Segal looks at the Holocaust and all these things as an outsider. She was part of that. She was, I think, 2 or 3 years old when she leaves Germany. Let's go to the first one. So she dies very, very young. She's at Yale. This is when in 63, she was a student of Albers, Joseph Albers. She's best friends with, when you hear this, and you should see her film, there's a beautiful film on it. Her best friend is Sol LeWitt. And there's a very famous letter when she's very upset about her work. Google it if you want. Go to letter from Sol LeWitt to Eva Hess. It's brilliant. It's been played in many different situations. I show this to all my students the first class we have, because she talks about how hard it is being an artist. So that's a self-portrait. Go to the next one, which is, I think, one of the greatest pieces of hers. So this is, she dies so tragically young. She's in her 30s, and she does this in 1963. And I don't know if you know who Elena Tsui is, another great living artist who's from Nigeria, and he takes bottle cans and puts them together. She's one of the first artists that I ever hear of that tells curators, I make the work, you hang the work, It's very much, again, to me, very Jewish about interpretation. I make it, other people are going to see it. You as the curator decide how to hang the piece. If you like this piece, go online and you'll see how many different museums have hung it differently. It's hung by chicken wire. Not chicken wire, I'm so sorry. By that clear fishing wire. Let's go to the next. So many people, including myself, think that unfortunately one of the reasons she might have died was because she used this toxic material. She died of a brain cancer, but I always feel these are beautiful. Look at them, they look like windows. She repeats images over and over again, and it's about repetition. And to me, again, it's about looking at one thing over and over again and changing it. You should really, if you like her work, you should look at it. I put these other artists in just at the end to round out artists who could be alive today. She could be alive today. And then we're going to end with Richard Serra. I'm racing as quick as I can. Richard Serra, I think, is a great contemporary sculptor, and he uses steel, Corten steel, and it's about inside and outside. And let's go to this next piece. I just want you to see how he looks like. He knows how brilliant he is, and he's not a shy guy. I've met him a few times, and it's about the idea of he wants you to interact. So if you notice how I started the lecture, you're with artists who are trying to see space, seeing the space floating in space, and I'm ending with an artist who's basically telling you, come into my space. See how it is to feel inside something. Feel like it, what it feels like to be an outsider and an insider at the same time. Understand that we all at times feel like outsiders and insiders, and what does that actually mean? They look much better outdoors than indoors, but I wanted you to see it indoors because I want you to understand that it looks different inside and outside. Let's go to the last image. Thank God I did it on time. This piece you actually walk into. No, it's not painted. This is the way the steel works. And it, people say to me, sometimes you see chalk marks when it gets in and out of the buildings. How do you get it in and out of spaces? He only shows with galleries that have these huge doors that can open, and it comes in pieces and has to come together. I cannot thank you enough because I see I did not lose that many people. You're still at 106, so it wasn't boring. I can't thank you enough for staying. So now, I hope you have some questions because I watched my time.
Thank you, Tobi. So if you have questions, just chat them in. We'll try to get to a few over the next few minutes. I will start with a few things. First of all, so as I mentioned, Tobi was scheduled to be our first ever community 1-month artist in residence here in Orange County, California this May. We pushed it to next May, given the challenges that we have of having programs in person. And Tobi says he's way better in person than he is online, but you were terrific online, Tobi, so thank you.
I think I'm way better, but I'm happy that you liked it.
And when Tobi is here in May, we're going to do multiple programs. There'll be lectures, hands-on art programs for local artists. And yes, we're planning on doing some trips up to LA to go to the Broad and other museums with Tobi. So if you're a member of CSB, now another reason to be a member, you'll get the first chance to sign on and adventure with Tobi. So Tobi, 2 questions for you. You were focusing on Jewish artists in the post-war period. I wanted to ask you the same questions about your own art. First of all, do you consider yourself a Jewish artist or an artist who's Jewish? And the second question is, how has your art changed since you first started doing art? Because you talked about those themes within the context of those artists.
All right. So first I want to just say Richard Serra is a Jew because somebody asked that and I'm always worried. He's half Jewish, but he is Jewish. And he's talked about that. I've been on a panel with him. Now about I have to say I'm very proud to be Jewish, but I am an artist who happens to be Jewish, who happens to be married, who happens to be a father, who happens to be a child of Holocaust survivors. I am not one thing, and I never want to be looked at as one thing. Now, saying that, I went to day school. I went to yeshiva until I was 12, until 12th grade. Everyone I knew were children of Holocaust survivors. German, ich spreche Deutsch wie English. I speak German like English. It was my first language. I then studied acting at Tel Aviv U for a year. Then I went to yeshiva in Israel for 3 years. and then I went back to art school. So I always say I can't separate my learning in yeshiva than my learning in art school. I used to tell my teachers that when I went to Hunter, I was a born again artist because I went to day school where there were no art classes. And I learned everything through my grandmother or through private teachers. I went to a school that I failed. I went to a yeshiva high school that gave art that you had to fill in the colors. I wouldn't do that. So I failed. My mother saw the failing mark and she said to me, this is ridiculous. She went down and she said, my son is a brilliant artist. You can't fail him because he doesn't follow directions. And he goes, yes, we can. So I made a deal with the teacher that I would do it his way for the grade, but I did not think that was art and I got an A for the class. So I always joke that I can't separate my artistic being from my Jewish being. As far as how my work changed, so my early work when I was a student, I was a photographer first, and my work was about memory. I think the fact that I'm named for my uncle who was killed in the Shoah and was a big part of me. My uncle was a medical student. My early work was all about loss. My work was quite dark, and over the years it's changed drastically. If you want to see what my work looks like now, you'd go to my website, tobikahn.com, and you'll see. So I never wanted to do Jewish ceremonial objects because I always felt growing up in the community that I grew up with, everyone would think that if you grew up observant, you would make ceremonial objects. So I did them. Basically, I closeted myself as a ceremonial object maker. And then God was good to me. I had a big show at the Guggenheim. And then Peter Sells, I don't know if any of you is from Berkeley. He was at MoMA in the 50s. He became my big patron, as did Jane Owen, the Blaffer Trust. And in the 90s, I outed myself and did my first ceremonial show in 1999 of my Jewish ceremonial objects. It was supposed to travel for 3 museums. It went to 27. So now I'm very comfortable, and I learned that from Peter Sells because he said, if you don't say it yourself, people will think that you're embarrassed of your upbringing. And not. I'm very proud, but I believe in making art as my life.
Anna Eisen, one of the young artists we have online, asked a question about oil paint. You said that oil paint can eat away at canvas. She's heard this before, but does a few layers of gesso paint help with that issue? There's a technical question for you.
Your teacher, whoever told you about gesso, they're 100% right. And it could be with rabbit skin glue, which I'm against because it kills animals. Gesso is brilliant. And I believe if you want to use oil, you should do 3 layers of gesso, sand it in between, and then get a beautiful flat surface. I try to use wood also, because then you don't have that give, but yes. I think you can use acrylic and oil. I don't know if you know, she just died, another great Jewish artist, Susan Rothenberg. I want to do a shout out to her because I think she was a great Jewish artist. She just died, and she also switched from oil to acrylic.
One of our CSP donors has a signed Gottlieb print in their house and was wondering if it was valuable.
The most important thing I'd say to you is if it's valuable to you, it's valuable. I think Gottlieb is a valuable artist, but the big problem is, I feel terrible to tell you this, it depends how it was framed. There's something called acid-free materials that you have to use. And when I'm in LA, please God, next May, I'm going to do a whole evening of how to protect the good art that you have. Because one of the saddest things, I adored my parents. They had a Laurent Saint that they bought at an auction, and they had a beautiful Salvador Dali, and they bought it from the Sharet Tzedek auction, and it was framed, but it had cardboard on the back, and it brought down the value almost to nothing.
Wow. You had said that you don't think the center of art is in New York right now. So where is the center of contemporary art?
There is no center anymore. There is no center. It's all over the world. One of the centers I still think is New York, but I think Berlin, if I didn't have my life in New York, I've been to Berlin. I showed at the museum there. I love Berlin, but I also think LA is a major center now. I think Singapore is now, there are many, many centers. Don't get me wrong, New York is still a center, but it doesn't have that chokehold anymore. I send many of my students for graduate school to London. If you're a student, I think there are 3 great schools in London now. I send a lot of them there. I think there's a great school in Cologne. I think there are more places to be. I do think New York is a center, but not the center.
Joyce asks, could you come back and give a lecture on Jewish photographers of the same era? Is there a similar analysis?
Oh my God, there's so many. Oh yes. But I would like to do Jewish artists, Jewish photographers today, because there's so many. See, it was a big question for me. I'm happy you like the lecture. When I'm in LA, I'm going to do
Orange County, please.
I'm sorry. Orange County to me is LA. I'm sorry. No. Orange County, I apologize. I'm a New Yorker. It's like that Saul Steinberg cartoon. I meant Orange County. I apologize to anyone from Orange County. I feel mea culpa. I apologize. But I do this lecture on great Israeli photographers. I do a lecture on great Jewish photographers. There are so many great photographers now. It's almost frightening. And I think it's a great time for Jews. I mean, like I told you, Susan Rothenberg is a great Jewish painter now. As is, I don't know if you know her, great performance artist, Meryl Euclides. There's so many great Jewish artists now and Jewish photographers. But yes, from that period, there were great Jewish photographers that were very important.
Gail Reisman, one of our longtime supporters of CSP, asks, aren't the plaster pieces like the gay liberation piece you showed us too fragile to be outdoors?
I'm so sorry. No, those have been cast in bronze. Some of those are plaster and some of them are bronze painted to look like plaster. I'm so sorry I wasn't clear about that. Yes, he does a lot of plaster cast. That's how he makes it. And then sometimes he casts it in bronze like the bread line. I've seen that in the plaster cast, and then let me explain to you how these things work. I just realized I'm talking not to artists. So let's say I take this, this bottle. So let's say, made this out of plastic. Then I want to have it, then I make a negative. I make a bronze casting of this bottle. I can paint it to look exactly like this plastic, but then I have the original plaster and I have the finished piece. So yes, it originally was done in plaster and then it was cast.
Ellen Prince asks, can you do a program on people who do performance art as well as traditional art?
Yes, there are so many great. The big problem is when I talked to Ari, I wanted to give something that I wouldn't be leaving out too many people. There are so many great performance artists, but I will be honest and tell you that as a rule, I don't only like showing Jewish artists, and that's why even today it was hard for me not to throw in. I believe we're a continuing system, and I believe we all learn from each other. So I don't know if I showed Israelis, I'd show some Palestinian Israelis. You know what I mean? Like, I believe we're all one group.
Before we go, can you tell us a little bit about the piece behind your head? That's one of your well-known art objects that you've made. I mean, you've made many of them, but you have one of yours behind you. Tell us what it is and how it works, if that's
so this is an Omer counter. So this is a fun story. I love
It's right behind his head. You can see it right behind
here,
his
I'll
head.
bring it up so you can see it from up close.
Yeah.
My bar mitzvah drasha I was born in May, in between Pesach and Shavuos.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And there's a question, do you count the Omer with a bracha or not if you're a minor? Because the responsibility, I'm not a rabbi, so if I get this not exactly right, I apologize already. But do you say a blessing when you're not responsible to do a blessing because you're a minor and you don't have to make this blessing? So my drasha was, do you make the blessing or not? Is it considered 49 separate days? Each day is each piece has a little like house, and it's numbered on the very bottom. And I believe that each day is its own piece, and I invented this. I'm proud to say it's in many museum collections, not only Jewish museums. Minneapolis Museum has it. The Jewish Museum, a lot of museums have it. And I wanted to make something because I'm very interested in diversity in the world. I don't believe that I believe in Tselem Elokim, that we're all made in the image of God, not only, everybody. I don't care what you are. I think every human being has a part of God in them. And I wanted to do a piece that showed all 49 days. It's 7, you count the Omer from the second day of Passover to Shavuot. And I wanted to count each day as a universe. So this is a conceptual art piece. I, by the way, am a conceptual artist who's interested in beauty. Everything I do is based on a thought before the action. So it took me from the age of 13 until I was 48 years old. I woke up my wife in the middle of the night and I said, I just figured out how to make an Omer counter. And she said, oh my God, really? Must we do this now? And I said, yes, we must do it now. I had a little piece of wood and I drew it and I said, I figured it all out. It was basically, it took me then 2 years to actually do this. The first piece, if you go online, if you go to my, what's that, is it called Instagram? I'm on Instagram. Look at the Omer counter and you'll see how it works. There are 49 pieces that fill in. I'm now doing my first gold Omer counter. The first one was pewter. Then I did a whole series in silver. Now I'm doing them in gold. And it's about the idea of refracted and reflected light, that I believe you are a better person by being next to somebody who's not like you. And I love that Jews are as different as we are. I like, you know, I remember giving a lecture, not in Orange County, when I had the show at the Skirball Museum in LA. I gave a lecture about some of my favorite Jewish artists, and I put in, what's his name again? The French artist, Modigliani. And I said, I love the way Modigliani looked because he had these gorgeous Jewish women with big necks and they had brown hair and red hair. And I love looking at Jews like that. And they said, somebody raised their hand and goes, well, don't you think blonde hair is Jewish? I said, my wife is blonde. Yeah, of course I do. But I liked seeing French looking Jewish women. And I'm very proud to see that diversity. I want diversity in my life. I would not be happy if everyone was the same, not only Jews, but everyone. So that is what this piece is about to me. Each day you take out one piece and you put it back. Some museums take them all out and just put in one day each time. But this is the most well-known of my Jewish ceremonial objects.
Last question. People have asked, what are the other objects behind you? Is that your art or is other
So I'm going to tell you a funny story. I teach at SVA. Right next to me is Leonardo Drew, one of my best friends. It's right there. But I was told when I gave a lecture to these students from Europe, why is your work not behind you? So behind me, these are miniatures of outdoor sculptures that I've done. This is the most well-known outdoor sculpture that I've done. It's called Shalev. If you Google Tobi Kahn Shalev, I did this for the Blaffer family. The Blaffers are in Houston and New Harmony, Indiana. This is the model of a 14-foot outdoor sculpture. I've done maybe 40 since then. I've done 2 Holocaust memorials, but this was the first one. She was one of the greatest. She was my real patron. She literally changed my life. I met her in '93 at a museum in St. Louis, and then she started commissioning major pieces, and this is the first one. So this is always here. Well, usually there's also an Alex Katz next to it. Louise Bourgeois is over here. Susan Rothenberg is there. But I was told that since I'm lecturing and I'm lecturing about other artists, I should have some of my own work behind me. So usually I'm not there.
Well, terrific. Really, I have to thank Rabbi Charlie Savanor for making the shidduch over, gosh, was it 2 years ago when we first spoke?
Yeah.
Toby? So even though you haven't been here in person, this was a great opportunity. This is my first opportunity to really actually talk to Toby on Zoom. Usually we've been talking on the phone, so I really enjoyed this program. The visuals, thank you so much. And maybe what we'll do is, you know, for a very high-level donor, they can come to New York and have a private tour of the art world and the art collection of Tobi Kahn. We'll talk about that offline.
By the way, that is one of my, I do lecture, I don't know if you know that. We're going to do that in Orange County. I take groups of people to look at art. I love doing that.
Yes, we're going to do that. Thank you all for sticking with us today. And what a great program. And what's so appropriate as we come to Shavuot to have that art piece and to end on that art piece. Everybody, thank you for your support for CSP. It's our 20th year. We'll see you. We have lots of stuff coming up. Sunday, Mark Michael Epstein talks about Jewish monsters and Jewish art.
He's a great guy.
Yeah. And we're going to go on a tour of the British Museum with Rabbi Dr. Rafi Zaram from the UK. It's the beauty of Zoom. We get to meet with the experts in the world in our living room when they come to us live from where they live. Thank you, Tobi. We'll talk soon. Thank you, everybody. Have a great and beautiful